Welcome to the Debunking Economics podcast, the first one of 2018, with Phil Dobbie and Professor Steve Keen. And today, the Austrian School of Economics. What is it? And what does Steve think they've got right? And what have they got wrong? That's today on the Debunking Economics podcast. Now, the Austrian School of Economics dates back to the 1870s when Carl Menger wrote the book, The Principles of Economics. What an imaginative title that was. Who said the Austrians are incapable of any creative thought? Was it groundbreaking at the time?
It was part of a general push against the classical school of economics, and this is the political context for the formation of economic theory, because the previous classical school, which came out of Smith and Ricardo, argued that effectively labour was the source of value. And what that means in effective terms is to say that the cost of something reflects, the price of something reflects its cost of production. Yeah. That was the fundamental basis. And they gave demand a secondary role. So they said cost of production determines price. Effectively, demand determines the quantity sold at that price. So there were two independent elements. And in general, what the neoclassical revolution did was to say, well, value is not objective, which is not based on the cost of production. It's based on the satisfaction the buyer gets from buying the product. And on the other side, the quantity, the price is determined by changes in the relative marginal utilities of the buyer and the seller. So the seller is regarded as getting marginal utility from the products they're giving away, and therefore each product that they, each additional Model T Ford that Henry Ford sold reduced the utility he got from all the ones he currently owned, while the purchasers on the other side were exchanging cash up to the point where the marginal benefit of the extra dollar was equivalent to the marginal satisfaction they got from buying the Model T Ford from Henry. Yeah. And that's the basic picture, that there's a trade-off. First of all, the way that Marshall sold the whole thing was to say that it's not a case of supply determines cost and demand determines price. The two determine simultaneously, like, the blades of the scissor. And that's one of those pervasive analogies that's stuck in the head of economists ever since, a bit like the invisible hand, the idea of the two scissors. And so that's the general milieu. But
the beginning bit of that, though, the idea of marginal utility, the idea, for example, that if I've got a sports car, I'm not going to be as satisfied with my second sports car because I don't need it as much as my first. That makes sense, doesn't it? Or if I've got an iPhone, I don't need another iPhone.
That's why I was including the example of the Model T Ford, because I defy anybody to believe that the Model T Fords on the production line and in the car yards gave any utility to Henry Ford. Yeah. This is the case that Marx made to make the argument that cost of production determines price rather than the satisfaction of the buyer. He said that if you go back to early primitive societies, when you had two Cro-Magnon tribes effectively meeting on the boundaries of their respective haunts. One might be able to make, for example, white leather, and the other might be able to make pottery, but one didn't know how the other did it. And in both cases, actually, I highly recommend for the not the final volumes of the series, but I highly recommend reading the Clan of the Cave Bear series by Jean Aeul, starting off with the Clan of the Cave Bear and then going through fictional, but in terms of based on the history of the evolution of human society and human technology, very well grounded in anthropological research. This idea of one tribe which learned how to make white leather. How do you make white leather? Simple. You piss on normal leather and the uric acid dissolves the colour and you get white leather. How do you make pottery? You put clay, which you've already formed into an object, into a fire. Now, these can both be accidental discoveries in each of the tribes. But what it means is one's got this nice fancy looking leather, the other's got pots that don't break straight away, that can be used multiple times, right, and have a glaze on them and so on. And when you first do the exchange, neither party knows how the other produces it. And Marx said in that particular situation, the utility that can be gained from the sale will be a major factor in determining the price. And the one group who's giving away some of its pots would have pots which are not surplus, but which it's being offered too good a price to refuse. So in that situation, the type of both sides having a change in utility made sense. So the argument Marx made was that as you started getting an established process of trade, then the utility for the seller, the decline in utility, is no longer an issue because you're actually making, specifically producing extra products for the same purpose of sale. You weren't producing them for yourself and then giving them away to somebody else because you got a better price. It was specifically produced for sale. And on the other side, the same thing applying for both products. So you ultimately got the cost of production or effort determining the price at which, the ratio at which two products exchange. And in the early days, Marx said this was predominantly the amount of labour that went into them. So that was the classical school. And the neoclassical school, in a sense, ignores that argument and simply says, well, it's all about maximising utility. Now, that gives you two strands to neoclassical thought, because one became the neoclassical school and the other became the Austrian school. And the major distinction between the two was that the Austrian school focused more on the process of innovation. So they would say that you don't want to reach the point where supply equals demand, because that robs the economy of the impetus that entrepreneurs use to bring about new products.
Right.
So the whole creativity of capitalism for the Austrian school comes out of the difference between the current level of demand and the current level of supply. And that disequilibrium opens up an opportunity for an entrepreneur to invent some new product, provides a service in some different way, and that's what leads to innovation and change.
Well, we're really only just starting to get into that discussion about the relative merits of the Austrian School of Economics. If you want to hear the full conversation, it goes on for about 35 minutes between myself and Professor Steve Keen, then you'll need to become a subscriber to this podcast. You can do that by going to debunkingeconomics.com and choosing one of the subscription plans in the right-hand column, or you can support Professor Steve Keen on Patreon. The money that you provide there is going to help his research work, and you can do that at patreon.com/Prof Steve Keen. If you provide $10 or more support per month, then you get access to this and all the other podcasts in this series. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again soon.